Hello, everybody, and welcome to our awards for the industry for 2024. A whole year gone. People to be lauded.
Yes.
People to be annoyed that they didn't make the shortlist.
Why didn't you pick me? Yeah, that's always the way.
These things are sent to try us. Yeah. Over the course of the next 3.5 to 5 hours, we'll be going through 8 different categories.
Citation needed.
Who knows? Who knows? Yeah. Giving you our top 3 shortlisted nominations from each of the categories, and then our final runner-up and winner.
Yes.
Who shall be hailed and acclaimed from the top of the tallest mountain. Beacons will be lit like Gondor.
It sounds like we're over-egging it, but 2024 was a big year. There was lots of stuff.
There was a lot. Yeah. We had to cut down many, many choices to get to the 3 that we have for each of our different categories. Wargaming in its own right, I think I had 20 games, something like that had all come out over the course of last year. So, yeah, it was mad.
There was a time when there was only 20 games.
Yeah.
Less. Didn't even make it in the double figures. Yeah. So we will be going through our choices in each of the 8 categories, bringing in a variety of team members to share their thoughts on who is in the running for each one. And we're going to be kicking things off with something that's very dear to Lloyd's heart. And that is, it's not Rome. Calm down, Lloyd. Don't panic. It is the best terrain for 2024. So our first nomination is the dystopian industrial set from War Cradle Studios. This was a modular little set, came out sort of mid-year. It predates the Armored Clash release, back when people were just looking for a load of sci-fi industrial terrain for any 10mm game, Imperialis, that you choose to mention, Imperialis. And this was a really compact set, but you could do an awful lot with it.
Very modular.
So incredibly modular. An absolute mountain of pieces in there. Allowing you to really let your creative juices run wild when it came to building up an industrial city for any sci-fi or steampunky game. So there's very defined aesthetic in there. It does have that Victoriana feel with the big high windows, but obviously if you're going to be playing this in something like Warhammer 40,000 in that universe, let's face it, it's never strayed far away from massive windows and big tall buildings. So
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So you know, all you're missing is a ton of skulls and eagles.
These are all quite small examples, but give it to someone like Warren, who's more is more is more.
Yes.
And suddenly you have monstrous buildings.
You do.
Yeah. Well, this is it, because the pieces there are set sizes. From a 1 square to maybe a 2x1 or a 1x2. All you then have to do is sit down and start clipping bits, dissect bits, and then just start building grand, spectacular things from cathedrals to monasteries to, you could build the equivalent of the Reichstag, which would be very handy if you plan on playing the Imperium in Armored Clash in the future. If you could literally fill a table with a building that's 4 foot long if you so desire. All you really need to do is sit down and make the plans, because obviously some windows go up. You don't want them suddenly going sideways, but there's enough components in there to do the job, and it's a very simple system.
And with the predictable footprints, you can quickly plan out what you're doing, or you could even play you could homebrew some rules and play like a grid system, because everybody loves grid systems, don't they, Jerry? Dead Zone.
Yep.
Dust.
Dust is still in your bones.
We're all there for good grid. Strength and honor. It's grid as well, although fantasy based. But so the industrial set is a great toolbox for 10mm modelers.
It follows really well in the footsteps of the likes of the Dead Zone terrain from back in day.
Yeah,
that Warren had a lot of fun with, and the modularity of that, and it certainly
just loves
has that DNA. So yeah, he loves his squares. Yeah.
Do an awful lot with them. It'll be interesting to see if they expand the sprues in the future. Maybe add some 45s, 60s, throw in a bit of hex, that sort of thing. Because once you've got the initial builds, you can always just improve upon it, and then it really is
very
just
true.
Up to the imagination and design aesthetic.
It'll be interesting to see if they put any domes in, like Warren had did. Warren's taken this set and he's built a massive table from it, and he's put on some cathedral domes and things on it, and it looks really cool. I think they should just copy what he did.
Yeah.
Either that, or people just have to break out the Kinder Surprise eggs, make your own.
That's true. Yeah.
And you have the added benefit of getting chocolate and a surprise.
Chris from Warcradle did ask, "Hey, where did you get those domes from? They're pretty snazzy." So
cracking
coming
stuff.
up soon.
Right. Our next nomination for our terrain is smaller again. We're going 6 mil this time.
Yeah.
And the Lazy Forger have produced a depot and hangar set for, well, it's for full spectrum dominance, but it can be used for anything 6 mil. And when I say it can be used for anything 6 mil, these are all STLs, so it can be used for anything up to 28 mil. I've seen people print these things.
Detailed. Yeah.
I've seen people print these up to 15 mil, 20 mil without any real issues, except obviously the size. So when you see things like the gantries, the forklifts, for all you forklift certified people, it's all great. But even things like the hangar itself, I mean, there you can see it looks absolutely phenomenal for rolling your tankies out of. But then when you see the interior, just the support work,
the gantries,
the beams, and then all the sections there, which will give anybody who works in a warehouse some form of PTSD, I imagine.
The health and safety.
Don't stack them that high. Where are your pallets?
Or anybody who works in a tire shop.
Yes.
Stack them like that too. Way up.
But the work they've done at the Lazy Forger is always top notch, and they're always adding and innovating with the design choices. So it gives a real lived in world feel, I suppose.
I think they should put a finger into every shot though.
Just a finger for a reference finger.
Yeah, they should just print out a finger and put it in.
Just so you know just how tiny these are, because those forklifts are about the size of my pinky nail. They are titchy tiny, which is always superb.
So what you're saying, Shut Up, Sit Down branded the standard reference pair, and Lloyd is now branding the standard reference finger.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It lets you know
how many fingers is
it lets you know how big a tactical rock is for a foot on rock thing.
Yeah.
This tactical rock is almost half a knuckle. Wow.
We should totally get on that. The universal finger scale.
The universal finger scale.
I'm 100% on board with this. Just like I'm on board with what the Lazy Forger have been doing.
So lovely.
I'd love to make a rule set that worked on fingers.
Yes.
Because it'd be so funny when someone like me plays it against someone like Jerry and like, how come you move so far?
Don't know, because fingers are a difficult one to put on the table, but spans.
Yeah.
Do a span. I remember being told at school.
That's how you measure cannon ranges.
I remember being told at school that everybody's span was about 7 inches, and that's why it got used as a default. I measured mine recently.
That's artillery.
And it turns out substantially bigger than 7
inches.
inches.
You're a boast there. Boasting, huh?
Yeah. 8 3/4 of a span coming your way, matey boy.
Oh.
Big cannonry in there. Anyway, I digress. Frequently. Our final bit of terrain comes from Sarissa. And Sarissa Precision have been working on a printed set of fantasy terrain called Tollenchester, which will be available. Well, it's available already, but is specifically being designed for the Guards of Traitors Toll.
Oh, yes.
However, they're using their new clever CMYK printing. So all full color all of the time. And this is an eclectic mix of super fantasy buildings. So if you fancy doing a bit of Discworld on the tabletop,
yes.
If you want to, run your Frostgrave people through this ramshackle buildings built within Felstad, you can do that. Obviously, Trader's Toll they're nailed on for, but they have a really distinctive look. And the most fun part for me is the modularity. So things like the balconies, the little gabling, even things like this massive front with the veranda. These are all separate and lock in and lock out. So you can pull them off the building and then just have a complete building by itself, and then attach it to something else or leave them off, which means
add walkways and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Nice.
With a very small amount of buildings, you can start to build up a substantial city that doesn't always have to be the same. So even if you've only got 3 buildings, every time you field them, you can cobble on things like this onto the front of one week, leave it off completely the next, add it to a different building the third week, and get a real populated city without having to have 150 individual buildings.
Can you get inside the buildings, though, or are they just outsides only?
You can. The insides are not detailed. I've done some unboxings on them. So you can lift off the top, and some of the buildings will have an interior level, and the floor in that level is printed, but the interior walls aren't. But because they're being made for this specific game, the idea behind it is that you can't actually enter the buildings for that game. I imagine in the future with other bits and pieces that they do using this CMYK print, they may do interiors as well.
If they come up with a version where you get in the interiors more, I think the Mordheim people would just eat that up.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're doing things like that, then you're going to end up with more ruined buildings as well. So being able to run about the rooftops, then jump into a ruined building and scuttle off is always good.
Yeah.
I mean, like I say, you can get inside the interior, but you can't go up and down levels because there aren't multi-levels in this. Gameplay-wise and build-wise, it makes life much easier.
I prefer to just run around outside buildings most of the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you
primarily the focus of Guards of Tabletop was to make sure that you got rid of all that finicky stuff anyway. So
because if you run around outside, then you can go and make sure nobody's scrumping apples off the market stalls.
True.
My extent to wanting to play in buildings is basically putting a marker beside the building saying, I'm in there.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's about it.
And if that's what you're after, then you can do that with these, because you can lift the roof off and pop the models inside and then pop the roof back on. So you're not running individually anyway.
I hear these guys do some amazing Roman buildings too.
They do.
Someone's been telling me about them.
Yeah. I don't know who it was.
Like a fort or something. I don't know. Yeah.
Maybe you heard it on the grapevine. I don't know.
Well, Roman buildings, who cares?
Anyway, so those are our 3 nominations for the best terrain for 2024. And our runner-up is the Lazy Forger for their 6mm depot and hangar set.
Very nice.
Well done for your tiny little things.
It. You probably would have been a winner if you'd put a finger in the shots, but you didn't.
That's harsh but fair.
They'll do that now.
Could you make sure it's what do people use to unlock their phone, their index? Can you make sure it's that?
Well, I use this finger for most things.
Yeah, your index. Yeah.
This one.
Yeah. Okay.
Ben points with his middle finger and it looks weird.
Only at events to annoy people who are watching from afar.
Oh, wait. Oh, my rule set about fingers is broken down. I've just figured out how you would hack it. You just grow really long nails.
I'm not getting involved in
From
this.
From base to knuckle, you cannot include nails.
Oh, then you've got people who've lost like the tip of their finger in an industrial accident getting absolutely hammered.
Oh, you're right. It's not inclusive enough. Oh.
Anyway, our winner for the best terrain of 2024 is Sarissa Precision and their Tollinchester.
Oh, so nice.
If you want to toil through Tollinchester, then definitely give them a look. You can fill a board like a legend.
I will say towards the end of last year, as well as doing that amazing set of sort of market stalls and the houses that go around it, they started to add in some really nice wall sections and forts and all that kind of stuff that can be bolted onto the side of those. And the whole idea behind the Guards of Tabletop Toll and Tollinchester is that the houses are essentially built into the walls or on top of the walls or around them. And so, that kind of modular nature that you were talking about there, Jerry, that's all built into that. So you can have the walls coming out the side of a building. And
I'll tell you what they're missing. They're missing a medieval bridge.
Of London Bridge style, yeah.
Where the buildings are on the bridge.
Yes.
On to our next category then. Best role-playing game of 2024.
Well, this one was a tough one, but we are going to be starting off with a game that I think we all sort of like internally love, and this is Doom Song by the folks at Caesar Inc. So Doom Song comes from the Caesar Inc. family, and they put together an absolutely fantastic Kickstarter that was to bring the Doom Song role-playing game to life alongside an adventure called Lord Have Mercy Upon Us. And one of the really cool things about the system is just how much effort they've put into the creativity that you get with Doomsong. Even making a character in Doomsong is a journey in of itself and almost a session in its own right. Because when you dive in and you build your gravediggers, you go through like a whole life cycle thing of sort of where you started, where you've come from, like what job you had before you were a gravedigger and all that kind of thing. You can die in character creation and you have to start over again. You may get all sorts of terrible things happen to you. You could be burnt, all sorts of terrible things. But then once you get through all of that, you then have to take on the role of a gravedigger who's been tasked to head around this apocalyptic fantasy world, trying to make sure that all the dead stay dead. And if they aren't dead, make sure they return to being dead. And all of that is tied into the terrible, terrible sort of apocalyptic nature going around with the horsemen and all that kind of stuff that are sort of causing all sorts of terrible things to happen around the world, starting with plague, which was or pestilence, I suppose, actually. Pestilence, Father Plague, who is the sort of main focus of Lord Have Mercy Upon Us. Although more of them are going to get added in the future as well.
So happy.
It does look like he's smiling in that picture. That's very true. The other thing that's really nice about Doomsong is mechanically, it's fascinating. It's very story focused, very narratively driven, and
don't you expect that from an RPG though?
Well, no, because a lot of them
Dungeons and Dragons aren't.
Yeah, some can be very, very combat focused. Others can be, more action heavy rather than. As in just like Hollywood rather than kind of like
how many dice can I roll?
Exactly.
Can I roll more
big dice pools and that kind of stuff. The combat system is pretty interesting in the game as well, in that you decide where you're going to sit in the initiative order and from there work out what happens as your turn comes around. So you have to kind of be like, well, if I go later, I'll get more to do or I'll get more powerful actions, but the boss is going to act multiple times ahead of me and all that kind of thing. So it's got a really nice risk reward element thrown into there. And of course you do that alongside everyone else at the table. And so that already feeds back into a nice cycle. I'll also say the design of Doomsong is like chef's kiss.
Yes.
It is, the artwork is gorgeous. The writing is fantastic. The layout is another like massive thing to this game. Even things like the character sheets have been designed in such a way that they are like functional and you can fold bits over so that they become better for using gameplay to then unfold them again after the fact when you just want to do your kind of like chatting sessions or that kind of stuff. There's maps galore and loads of other bits and pieces that they've thrown into this. And it is a proper full-on indie style RPG that is made with love. And there was no surprise that it went down so well on both Kickstarter and with its full retail launch towards the end of last year as well.
I mean, the fact it's called Doomsong and it comes with a Doom coin should not be neglected. That is my favorite thing. Because
do you take the Doom coin? I guess.
Yeah. You can take the Doom coin, flip the Doom coin to either, turn a failure into success or success into a critical success. But if you fluff it, then you are doomed and you hold that. And anytime anything bad happens to the group, the GM doesn't have to randomize it because you're the one holding the coin.
Wouldn't it be more practical to come with a shovel?
No, not.
I think they should add a tactical shovel in the expansion. Yeah.
Well, if you're a gravedigger, what the heck?
Yeah,
that would be like shoveler action.
You can go full shoveler, and you master your anger before your anger masters you.
Another thing that's really nice about it is that because you've come from all sorts of different walks of life, it has a very kind of like Warhammer fantasy roleplay feel to it, where in essence, a lot of you could just be kind of like dungers who have been thrown into this terrible adventure, whereas others you might have actually been knights at one point, and now you've been turned into a gravedigger of all things.
You've fallen so far, but on the plus side, you can read.
You can read, yeah. Which way do we go? I don't know.
None of us in the group can read.
Follow the dead.
Toss a Doom coin. Right. Who's our next nomination then?
Next up, we're going to be looking at the work of Edge Studio, who have taken the Arkham Horror range, the card game and the board games from the folks at Fantasy Flight Games, and turned it into its own role-playing game. So this came out last year, and it's a little bit of an interesting twist on the sort of Cthulhu format. So it obviously is based on Lovecraftian mythos and has that sort of background to it. But they've gone for a slightly more, I guess you say, like up-to-date pulpy feel to it. Mm-hmm. So it steps away from the kind of the stories of of Lovecraft and sort of embraces its own mythos in a strange way, which is quite an interesting take, I suppose. And you still get to play as the kind of classic characters that you'd expect. So, you know, your gumshoe detectives and all that kind of stuff, and your singers, your jazz musicians are all getting caught up. Yes, or your flapper girls and all that kind of thing, all getting dragged into sort of all sorts of strange scenarios. But it's done very much from a sort of unique standpoint in terms of mechanics. So the traditional Call of Cthulhu game is obviously a D100 percentile system game that you play. Arkham Horror, the role-playing game, uses D6s, and the D6s are assigned to different spots on your sheets. And the interesting thing with the way that the D6 work is that, so you see those little boxes underneath the stats there for the characters. Mm-hmm. Whenever you're going to attempt something, you choose how many dice from that pool you're going to use in order to try and attempt the test, and then you roll them to try and hit the values, as you can see in the skills above, obviously taking into account other different things like weapons and all that kind of stuff. But obviously, this means that you could throw everything into one big action during your turn, or you could split it up into lots of little things that you're trying to achieve. So if you really need to succeed on something, you throw all your dice into maybe that one shot against something that's coming towards you out the darkness. Or maybe you're being slightly more cautious. You maybe take 2 dice and then 1 dice and then 2 and then another one. What's really cool about that as well is that obviously folds into the combat quite nicely. And that dictates kind of the initiative structure as well, because it kind of refreshes once you've spent all your dice. But in narrative scenarios, you spend the dice in the same way, using them as a pool in order to pass tests. Mm-hmm. But to keep the clock ticking on an adventure, when you use all of your pool of dice, time moves forward. Oh, okay. So as you so you do all your actions, and then the clock ticks maybe 10 minutes further forward, and it's that little bit close to something terrible happening. So there's a really nice inbuilt kind of like pace to the game as you're playing it. But they've really thrown a lot of the stuff from both the card game and the board game into the RPG as well. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot to do with like props and all that kind of thing. So a lot of people might remember in Arkham Horror, the board game in the 2nd edition, they had like a cool sliding puzzle that they added into that. They've got one of those in the starter set for you to do. And as a storyteller, you're encouraged to bring that kind of stuff into your RPGs. So I think what's quite nice about Arkham Horror, the role-playing game, sort of like to cap it all off, is that Call of Cthulhu is fairly approachable anyway. I think it's a fairly easy system for you to get your head around, and a lot of people will have seen or, you know, heard about Lovecraftian tales. Jerry nodding furiously. But with Arkham Horror, the role-playing game, I think they've made it, the mechanics feel very, very approachable. And if you've already played the card games and the board games, this is a really natural step for you to take to try role-playing games for the first time, because it feels a bit more board gamey, a bit more kind of like tabletop-y, before it then transitions into full-on sort of like role-playing.
Yeah,
stuff,
which is cool.
So, yeah.
Totally different to Dad.
Dad? Oh, D&D. Right, I see what you mean.
Yeah, you've all been calling the wrong name for years. It's Dad.
I want to play Dad.
Say nothing.
Forums for that.
Casual.
Right, yeah. So yeah, that is Arkham Horror, the role-playing game from the folks at Edge Studios. The last of our nominations is, interestingly, related to D&D with a twist.
Dad
with a twist. And this is Tales of the Valiant, which comes from the folks at Kobold Press. So a lot of people will remember, if you're in the role-playing sphere, that Wizards of the Coast haven't necessarily had the easiest time of it running up to the launch of D&D 5th edition and made some questionable decisions.
Yes.
And so companies like Kobold Press put together options for those people who want to dive in and kind of like get the best out of this style of game, but without the threat that comes from mega corporations. And so they put together the Black Flag system, which was their kind of like sort of core set of rules that you could always build on and change and use as you saw fit when it comes to your own creative endeavors. Their actual role-playing game that was then built out of that is called Tales of the Valiant. And it works a little bit like 5th edition, but they've gone through and done lots and lots of little tweaks here and there to kind of take the D20 format and the 5e style of game and kind of evolve it in different ways. So they did a lot of things before even the release of the Player's Handbook for actual D&D that kind of have then been replicated in the official game, I suppose you'd say. So they've reworked how lineages and heritage works in the game, and the kind of way that backgrounds then affect the way that your characters work and how they're upgraded. They've added in a lot more stuff when it comes to talents and feats almost. that feels a little bit more in line with the way that they worked in 4th edition, rather than.
No, don't ignore me. I'm just laughing at all the butlers, thinking, "What a crap role-playing session that would be, just being a butler."
All the I've lost my train of thought now. God damn you, Lloyd. How feats and stuff work, so they're a little bit more like powers from 4th edition, and what they've essentially done with the rules is that they took that kind of base set of mechanics from 5e and they kind of basically turned it up to 11 and then snapped the knob off in most cases, so it will stay loud and action packed and all that kind of thing. So, we were talking earlier about narrative games compared to sort of more action themed games. That's exactly what Tales of the Valiant has been themed to do. The other thing they've done is they kind of played around with the notion of failure and success in the game. And one of the things that a lot of people have quite liked from looking at it on sort of Reddit and all that kind of stuff is they've got a luck system in the game. So the 5e rules, and by extension what they've done with Tales of Valiant, is kind of binary. You either pass or you fail. That's inherently how it works, essentially, with the D20 systems. But what they've done with this is that they've got in the luck system. So when you fail, you get points of luck that can then be used to add rerolls or bonuses to future rolls. So even if you failed the first time, well, you learned something about that experience, and now that then applies to what you do in the future, which I think is a really nice way of kind of balancing out that binary nature of the game.
Stops trapping a party at a door that they just can't get by.
Yeah,
forever.
And it, stops that thing where the wizard consistently casts spells and the enemy keeps resisting it and all that kind of thing. And so they've basically done nothing the entire fight, which is one of the problems with D&D.
That's why I never bring wizards.
Yeah. Well, that's true. They've also kind of like retuned the game as well, so that it's kind of, as I said, a little bit more heroic, but that then feeds into the idea that combats are a lot more punchy. Monsters can do a lot more to you. Creatures that we generally consider to be fairly kind of like fodder-like goblins and stuff, can like really mob players and stuff if you don't work properly with them and sort of fight tactically. And as I said, all of this is built on the back of the Black Flag role-playing system that they put together. So if you are interested in developing your own stories for Tales of the Valiant and stuff, then you can do that, or maybe even taking off in your own direction and sort of making your own rules based on what they've done. If you are interested in trying out the game, there's lots of ways for you to dive into it as well. You can download sample characters and you can play through all sorts of different things. And as you saw as we were scrolling through that list of stuff, there are endless adventures for you to try out for yourself and see whether or not you like the game. So if you're somebody who maybe was disenchanted by 5th edition and you want, or 5.5, I suppose, with the new version, then maybe come and have a look at Tales of the Valiant, because Kobold Press are doing something similar but different enough to make it stand out from the role-playing crowd.
Who is our runner-up?
Well, our runner-up for best role-playing game of 2024, I didn't remember the numbers then, was Kobold Press's Tales of the Valiant. Yeah, taking something familiar and yet different and bringing it to tabletop for more people and making it very accessible for everybody at the same time, which I think is no bad thing. And hopefully should be a good entry point for a lot of people who are maybe wanting to try out role-playing games for the first time.
Who's our winner, Ben?
The winner of Best Role-Playing Game of 2024 goes to the incredibly unique and original Doom Song by the folks at Caesar.
Huzzah!
We played the game and it was absolutely fantastic. Since then, I have seen people learning about Doomsong for the first time and being taken through character creation, and they have in many ways not been RPG fans or thought that they weren't even interested in it, and by the time they finish with character creation, they are sold on the concept. And I think that is a massive plus for the game, because something like that could either make or break an RPG, and I think they've managed to do a sterling job of that. Bring together the art, the design, the love that they've poured into Doomsong, and it is definitely one of those proper indie RPGs that you need to add to your collection.
How indie is it? I got a map, and my map was hand-stitched by one of the members of the three designers. Do you know which one? Because all three of them had to knuckle down and just stitch a ton of maps out to stop fraying at the corners. So yes, that's how indie they are. Get the maps, stitch the maps ourselves, push the maps out. But yeah, I'm looking forward to actually running my first game of Doomsong in the next couple of weeks at the club. And
super cool.
And they've already announced, because this is the first as we know, Plagueland, Pestilence,
Yep,
the first
the
big
Pestilence one.
campaign,
Yeah.
is the start of the sort of the apocalyptic campaign. And Caesar announced in January that there will be a second campaign book coming, another massive narrative campaign with Suffer Not the Witch to Live.
Because there's always more graves.
Always more graves. And if you're not filling somebody else's, then somebody will be filling yours. So
I wonder how long your shovel would last. You think you like get new heads for your shovel and some new handles? Probably have the same shovel for about 25 years, I guess.
You need to fill out a form and send that in triplicate.
There is a very, for anybody who picks up doing something to play, there's a substantial legal guild roster that you have to sign off the contract with, which essentially puts you down for all of the world's ills and having to replace your own spade. Right. Enough of that. Okay, we're back with our next category, and this time round, it's card games.
Yes.
Something you can peg to your spokes on your bike.
And make funny noises.
And an amazing brrr noise.
And then throw the tokens at nearby passers-by as you drive past.
What else would you do with them?
So these are the best 3 card games for enabling you to do that.
Yes.
No. So these are the best 3 card games of 2024. These are our nominations that we've put together after a little bit of back and forth. Again, this was quite a good year for card games. Lots of interesting things popping up here and there. Some really interesting and novel concepts, as well as sort of slightly more traditional ones as well. And we start with something a little bit more traditional.
Yes.
From the folks at Fantasy Flight Games, who bought out properly Star Wars Unlimited in 2024, which is absolutely fantastic.
It's those people from the Bale and Skull show.
It is, yeah. So Star Wars Unlimited is an interesting one in that it's almost a return to a classic style of card game rather than trying to run with any kind of gimmick or anything like that. And so with Unlimited, it was essentially boiling things down to the essence of what makes a card game a card game, but with a few kind of like unique twists here and there that kind of borrow a little bit from other games as well. When you play Star Wars Unlimited, you will choose a hero or a villain. It might be Luke Skywalker. It might be Darth Vader. It might be, any
Grand
Moff
Skull,
Tarkin, for example, Grand Moff Tarkin, any of these kind of characters from the sort of wider world of Star Wars. And then alongside that, you'll set up a base. And what you'll be doing during the game is you'll be playing cards. And then when those cards are played, you'll be able to use them to attack either the other units that are on the tabletop or attack the base. And the main thrust of the game is that you'll be trying to destroy the enemy base. And if you do that, you win. There are some sort of tweaks and sort of different elements in there that kind of like obviously make the game slightly deeper as well alongside that. So characters all have various abilities and things that might stop you from attacking the base or mean that you have to attack them rather than, attacking heroes and all that kind of stuff. And you have action cards as well as characters and units and things that you can upgrade and vehicles and all sorts of stuff. So all the classic things you'd expect from Star Wars. The heroes or the villains that you play in the game have sort of abilities that are sort of like passive as you're playing, but then they also have like epic actions, as you can see there. So once you start to build up more and more resources throughout the game, you'll be able to unlock those powers, and then in some cases they can kind of like come to the battlefield to start fighting alongside your troops. So if you think about it from the kind of the idea of Darth Vader maybe hangs around in the shadows for most of the kind of encounters of, say, the first movie or something in A New Hope. But then as things start to get on, he starts to get more involved. He starts to fight in the, the trench run and all that kind of stuff, and get it and sort of like get stuck into the action. And so that's kind of brought to the fore here as part of Star Wars Unlimited. The other thing that I really like about the game, and it's something that we'll see actually across 2 of the nominations that we've got here, including this one, is the idea of cards as resources. So it's something that's not necessarily a new concept. When you start your turn, you have a decision to make as to which cards from your hand you want to put down into your play area to work as one of the resources that is then used to pay for the other cards that you have. So it's a really interesting decision to make at the time because, essentially you're sacrificing a card from your deck that you've built in order to pursue a particular agenda at that given moment. And so there's a really nice back and forth there between sort of like what you need at that time as to what you think you're going to need in the future. Do you hold onto that card that is essentially useless for the first couple of turns in order to play it later, but then run the risk of not having the resources earlier on in order to keep doing things in the game and, you know, defend your base and everything at the same time. And there's also a really nice key mechanic in there as well, which I think it comes from other games as well, which is like seizing the initiative. So one of the nice things about the game is that you essentially go back and forth playing cards, blah, 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 but then you can always decide to do nothing on your turn and seize the initiative, which essentially ends your go, but it means that you're definitely going to go first next turn. So it's another one of those kind of like, do I push my luck, take the initiative because I know that I really want to do X or Y next turn in order to solidify myself a win or a good card play or something, whilst also wondering whether or not the other player is just going to try and steamroller you at the same time, which I think is quite cool. So yeah, a really fun little card game. We talked about this with some of the designers at UK Games Expo in 2024. It was really interesting hearing their thoughts on the game and kind of no real gimmicks. It's just a cool, badass card game for Star Wars. So if you're interested in that, make sure you check it out. Old
CCG.
School. Old school. Yes.
Why reinvent the wheel?
Exactly. Yeah. So
just use it on a tide crawler to run over some rebels' heads.
Yeah. That's the way to go.
That is the way to go.
So that's Star Wars Unlimited from the folks at Fantasy Flight Games. The second of the nominations is something that is altogether very different. So this is Altered, which is a new game from the folks at Equinox. And Altered is very different in that it's not a combative card game. So you're not putting units down the tabletop and fighting each other when you sit down to play this game. Essentially, it's an exploration-based card game, which is very different. The whole sort of premise of the game is that you'll be playing as both a hero and their companion. And then over the course of the game, you'll be moving across locations that are set in the middle of the board in order to reunite your hero with your companion and essentially win the game. There's all the kind of classic card types that you'd expect to find in a game. So you've got your characters, you've got your spells, you've got permanents, all that kind of stuff as well in there. But one of the key elements of the game is that, as I say, there's no combat, but what effectively you're doing is you're trying to play your characters out into the field or your events and everything in order to build up certain, let's say the word elements, that are present on each of the different sort of like tumult wilderness cards in the middle of the board. Mm-hmm. And your aim is by the end of the turn, effectively, to have the most in a certain element type. So it might be like woodland or water or something which then enables you to move further down the track and kind of end the game, which is quite nice. So it's a really nice push and pull mechanic to the game. The other thing that's really good about it as well, and definitely worth sort of looking into in a little bit more detail, is the idea that there's no sense of like you play one big card and that's going to win you the game. So you will play cards out each turn, but they'll have abilities that will affect the game in that turn that they're played. And then they sort of go back into kind of like a resting state behind your sort of front line. Mm-hmm. Well, they'll then have a different sort of way that they work. And then from that point on, they'll kind of vanish. So there's a really interesting sort of thing of like, these cards are going to be here for maybe 2 turns or something. I have to make the most out of them those 2 turns and then they're gone. So as the opponent, you might be getting absolutely slapped in the first couple of turns, but then you realize that those characters aren't going to be there forever. So you've got some kind of like way back into the game to kind of like make your next steps, make your plays, which I think is a really nice touch. The other thing I really liked about it, again, is something that's tied into sort of what we talked about with Unlimited, in that you also have that card-based economy in there. So cards, again, are your resources. So you have to, again, make those hard choices. And it's something that I think seems to be popping up with a lot of card games nowadays, where the cards you play are then used to play other cards, sort of put them face down in front of you. And again, you have to kind of make those decisions as to what you do now and what you do later, and sort of like planning ahead, which I think is quite nice. There is a lot of different cards in the game already. They've already sort of gone down the route of semi-digital format as well. So you can kind of keep your collection online and all that kind of stuff. You can also do a thing where you can get cards printed and sent to you. So if you're missing certain cards from a collection, you can kind of work with the guys at Equinox to then get those cards sent out to you printed by the company, which is quite nice. So if you're missing something because you haven't got certain decks or whatever, then you can always be like, that's a really nice one, or I'll get my hands on that one and it'll get added to my collection and all that kind of stuff, which I think is quite nice. So yeah, a novel concept, an exploration style card game rather than it being a competitive one. some interesting ways in which the mechanics work. That digital format as well, too, I think is really interesting. The art style is also phenomenal. They have put a lot of effort into making the game as bright and beautiful as you can see here in some of the cards that we're getting. And I think it's going to be one of those that's going to start to tick up and up as we delve deeper into the rest of 2025 and find out more about what they have planned for the game. So yeah,
it's interesting.
cool.
I noticed that they have a, well, let's say common, uncommon, and rare approach to a lot of the cards. So
yes,
they do the same, or they have the same stat line, but their ability gets progressively better.
Yes,
maybe not massively powerful, but just slightly better in each instance.
And that's one of the interesting things about the game, because you may sit down for a tournament or something with a particular hero and then realize that, oh, actually that's that kind of slightly better version of that they've managed to get their hands on, kind of thing. And so they'll be able to so you've got that sort of element to the deck building as well. So it should create some interesting scenarios on the tabletop. But because essentially you're looking to build up the numbers, as long as your engine works nicely, that's the key, I think, to Altered and what you're building there. So there is a bit of back and forth between it, but because you're essentially building a deck to make your engine work well, as long as you've done that in a good way and you make sensible choices during the course of gameplay, it should end up being
I've noticed
an interesting
that
one. So
the artwork is slightly different.
Yes.
Which I hadn't realized until Ski Scotty came in there.
You see the additional
so he's skiing and then they're surfing, and then over here you've got 2 on the first 3. Yeah. So tweaking the artwork. It's those one fanatical collectors out there.
Yeah, it's one that really kind of came out of left field last year, where like everyone was like, "Oh my god, this is a really fascinating new card game."
Yes.
Fingers crossed that it all goes well for them as we move into the rest of the year. But a fascinating one.
Sweet
to consider. So,
who's our last nomination then?
So last up, we're going to be looking at something that's a little bit different from both of those. So while the 2 games we've looked at currently are sort of more traditional games in that it's a 1 versus 1 experience that you play at the tabletop, Kinfire Delve, and by extension Callus Labs, which is the one that we're going to be looking at here in particular, is a 1 to 2 player cooperative card and dice game that is essentially a dungeon delve in a box. So rather than you having to end up spending, £90 on roleplay books and then the extra stress and time of bringing together your friends to have a session every 3 months, you can instead sit down and play through a role-playing session, by yourself or with a friend, in as little as 60 minutes using one of these boxes. So this is kind of a spin-off to their existing Kinfire range, which is a slightly more in-depth Gloomhaven style affair where you play on battle mats and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But what they've done with Delve is they've kind of distilled that down into a deck-based card game with dice elements as well, in order for you to kind of get that experience, but in a shorter time span. So the whole idea is that you build a dungeon out of 4 challenge cards, and then you work together by playing cards from your hand and matching the colors to the dungeon card in order to complete the different challenges. And then the dice you roll can give you essentially wild variants to that. So they'll give you extra blue or red in order for you to pass through different levels of this challenge. What's really interesting is that whilst you beat 4 of those cards in order to eventually beat the boss at the very end, there are 57 in a deck. So every single time you come down to play, you could essentially be playing a variant of that dungeon consistently every single time. The other thing that's really lovely about this is that it's stupidly cheap.
That is good.
And the artwork is phenomenal. One of the things they really wanted to do with the Delve and by extension Kinfire is create a very bespoke, beautiful experience in a box. So it's you're not feeling like you're getting a cheap card game. You're feeling like you're getting something really, really hefty out of one of these sets. The other thing that's really good about the Delve series as a whole is that while essentially you could just play with just the one set ad infinitum effectively and just keep playing Callus's Lab if you wanted to, there are various Delve sets with different heroes and different dungeon cards and different enemies and all that kind of thing. And you can mix and match all of them. So if you pick up the heroes from one of the sets, you could use them in, Callus's Lab in order to win that one and stuff. So there's a really nice variance in there at the same time. And it kind of feels like it fits into the wheelhouse of games like Marvel Unlimited from the guys at Simon, where it's a very low entry point, delivers a really well-rounded experience in a small box,
Hmm.
but then is infinitely expandable as long as the publishers want to keep doing it and sort of taking it in different ways. So it's got some really nice sort of detail to it to make it worth checking out. And as I say, was quite an interesting sort of like underground hit, I think, in 2024.
Yeah.
Following on from what they've been doing with Kinfires in general. So yeah, very worth.
I
very
do
worth
like
checking
the idea of being able to mix and match, especially heroes to dungeons or vice versa.
Yeah.
Because you could end up, I dare say people will come across specific heroes that they go, it's really fun to play that particular hero and his deck. I'd like to see what happens if I throw him into X, Y, or Z.
You also get the more boxes you get, the more players you can have, so you can increase the player count up to 4 as well once you've got 2 of the sets, because obviously then you've got 4 heroes to play with. Oh yes, another thing that I there's a shared health pool, so you can't just rely on one person to like ace it and you die. If you're out, then everyone loses. So there's a really interesting sort of cooperative element to there as well. You have to kind of like work together in order to make it to the end. So definitely worth checking out if you're interested in something a little bit different from your standard card game. Make sure to check them out from the guys at Incredible Dream Studios. Very nice. Yeah.
So those are nominations. Who is our runner-up, Ben?
So our runner-up, as we've just been talking about, is Kinfire Delve and Callus's Lab by the folks at Incredible Dream Studios. Definitely worth checking out. If you're at the UK Games Expo this year, make sure to go and have a look for it, because I'm sure it's going to be over all sorts of different stands, and it might be really fun to play in the hotel after an event day, sort of wandering around getting tired. Very worth checking out.
Or play it on the floor.
Play it on the floor. Yeah. And then the winner for Best Card Game 2024 goes to Equinox and Altered, which is their absolutely fantastic game. You know, it doesn't have to all be about combat.
It's true. Why can't we all just get along? The exploration aspect of it, the incredible artwork, the really fun and interesting mechanics to do with resource management and all that kind of thing. The way that you've got that sort of semi-permanence to stuff with cards, so you can't just have one winning formula. You're going to have to keep adapting on the fly. And the continued support from the folks at Equinox towards sort of like building on that and creating an interesting resource for people to keep collecting and building on their decks, I think is really fascinating. And in a time coming out of like sort of, you know, the pandemic a couple of years ago now, where, you know, card games and collectible stuff feels like a risk. I quite like that Altered have really gone whole hog on it and have been like, no, we're going to really sort of like put the work in and make this tick for people. So yeah, very cool. Altered, fantastic stuff.
Very
sweet. Like candy. Congratulations to all of those people whose cards are now pegged to their spokes on their bikes.
The only use for
relive my youth. You can't stop me. Right. We shall move on and take a look at our next category. We have the best accessory for 2024. First up, and this is one that came right at the end of the year, but is, we think, a bit of a game changer, and courtesy of the Army Painter and Deep Cut comes the Speed Paint Pens.
Yeah.
For people who don't want to put paint on a paintbrush, why not just use a paint pen?
Yeah, exactly.
And John has had a chance to play around with these, but essentially it is just that. It is a pre-filled pen with a brush tip filled with the speedy paints that allows you then just to quickly color in your figures. You don't have to even think about paint. It's not painting. You're just coloring in.
Yeah. Makes it so much easier, right?
They're another sort of tool in the box kind of item for me. I have used them a fair bit now. I've been playing around with them a lot and finding places where reaching for a pot of paint, opening the pot of paint and dipping a brush in it and then applying it to the model and then cleaning the brush was going to take longer than just reaching over and grabbing a pen.
Yeah.
There's plenty of applications for them, and a lot of people have been like, a few people at least have been saying, oh, it's a solution looking for a problem. I don't really think they are. I think there is a use for them, and if you have them sat beside you, you'll find that use for them without just.
Well, there's two
blasting.
things whenever you're playing with any speed paint or express or contrast, whatever, and that's how much to load the brush and what size brush to use. Because I know a lot of people ran into problems simply because they were using a small brush or a brush that didn't have a particularly large belly, and they weren't getting much of whatever paint they were looking to apply on, and then they weren't getting the result they were seeing from other people. Ergo, these paints are crap. So I suppose having the pre-built tip, the pre-sized end for it, helps with both how much should be loading into it for your application. And the other thing is, I know myself, I always put out more than I need onto a palette, and therefore it's not going back in the pot. So having it stored inside the pen itself means if you're not using them relentlessly all the time, you're not having to worry about wasting.
One of the uses for it that I thought was quite nice when I saw your demonstration video, John, was and it's something that's going to be quite pertinent this year, is the idea of using it for kind of like lining and stuff on Gundams and stuff. And essentially, you put a little bit more on, but then just that thumb swipe to get rid of it just makes the effort of doing that so much easier, or rather than having to use like the capillary action of like a particular tool or something. I think it's a really nice use for those markers. And just as you say, I think one of the great things about it is that if you find a niche for that within your hobby arsenal, effectively, you're just going to make your job easier, which is something that we want from anything that we use for a painting that makes it go away.
I'm always
miniatures are done.
I'm always of the mentality that you can never have too many tools, because even if you only use it once for one particular thing, well, you've saved yourself a bit of time with that one particular tool. So,
are they refillable? Because I see paint nibs and stuff there.
Yeah, I believe they are refillable, because the whole end unscrews, which if you're not careful with them, because I think one part of it is right hand thread and the other part of it is left hand thread, so if you turn too hard one way, you might pull the whole unit off and just spill. Right. I've noticed that a couple of times. I've went to take the lid off and I've screwed, and what I've done is I've undone the main screw part, and I've started to see paint seeping into the thread of that. So I believe they're refillable based on how much you can potentially spill.
So you are lefty though, aren't you?
Yeah.
So so you're coming at it from the opposite direction from the rest of us.
My natural twist is lefty loosey.
Yes. So for the majority of us, we're not going to have to worry about that. For left-handed people, be aware. Be very aware.
But lefties are more creative anyway, so like it's all
that's what they tell us. Yes.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. So that's our first nomination. Next up, we have a man who's already featured today.
By extension,
yeah. The delightful John Hodgson. He has been doing a whole ream of background or backdrops for miniature photography. This is part of Handiwork Games that John works through. And these are fantastic for anybody who's confident enough to want to take pictures of their miniatures. Less so for me, who doesn't have anything painted. But for those who do, he's been knocking these out of the park. The initial backdrop book was an A4 that he did with Bad Squiddo.
It was, yes.
Done with Annie. And then since then, they have expanded into A3. So
it was
if
A3 this year, I think.
Yeah, if you have particularly mohosive miniatures that an A4 just isn't going to cut the mustard, then you can get a whole variant type. And the backdrops are nice matte, all hand-drawn by John, giving a variety of sort of scenes, exterior scenes that you can then prop up behind whatever the figure happens to be. And as you can see, he has been doing a whole host of these.
Quite a few.
A lot of people photograph their miniatures in a light box, or they'll do it against a piece of paper or something like that. And that's absolutely great for showing off the details of your miniature. But if you're somebody who's not like the most high-end painter, it can also be one of those things where it gets slightly more demoralizing, because you take a photo of it and you go, oh God, I didn't paint the underneath of his cape, or I've missed that bit of his hand, or oh no, there's some fluff on his head, or anything like that. The nice thing about the backdrops is that it kind of does the job of taking miniatures at the tabletop,
Hmm.
in that it gives you the idea of what your miniature looks like in its sort of like environment
Yes.
almost. It immediately sort of set the scene for something. So if you've suddenly got your Vikings up against the backdrop of a stormy Nordic landscape using one of those backdrop books, it makes that set of miniatures that you've painted look decidedly better than if you'd just taken a picture of them in a standard light box. And I think that's what's really nice about what John's done with those, is that they've provided people with really nice opportunities to kind of like do more with their miniatures after the fact. And also, you could always just flick through the different backgrounds and set them up on your mantelpiece behind your miniatures. So when you're displaying them, you can have this ever-changing backdrop. So it's quite nice.
It's also a good way of doing it.
Yeah.
I will say the standard setup prior to that for people taking in world would be to either paint them yourself or to find a railway layout backdrop.
Yes.
Which means you are very restricted, because generally they are all the green and verdant hills that look like the Shire. So if you're not doing a ton of hobbits, you were limited. Because these are bespoke for modelers, it means you've got various environments that we would expect to see in fantasy worlds or alien worlds, that sort of thing, especially with the Skies book, because you can put your terrain and bits and pieces with your lovely cigar box battle mat onto the table, put your miniatures on top, and then put in a stormy sky or a setting sun or whatever it happens to be. And if you're creative enough, you can always light it appropriately as well.
Yeah.
Our last nomination for our accessories comes from a little Danish company.
Well, I don't think I've heard of them, but no.
And they have released this to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the tabletop game Dungeons and Dragons, and they are called Legos.
Lego, something like that.
Is that how?
Okay, so
Never catch
Lugu.
Lugu. Bear with. It's probably one of those silly IKEA names. That's probably what it is. Yeah.
Oh,
Swedish, but
you've just crossed the stream there.
Swedish. I know.
Do you know how many of my friends you'll have annoyed? I'll be getting emails
Let's
from
not
Danes
cause a diplomatic
answering,
incident.
and then some Norwegians just laughing.
So bear with me here.
Yes.
Right. Dungeons and Dragons is cool.
Yes.
Lego is cool.
I'm with you.
What do most people want to have on their backdrops behind them in their hobby rooms? Frickin' awesome dioramas and all that kind of thing. So why not go the whole hog and get yourself a frickin' awesome Red Dragon's Tail Dungeons and Dragons set like this? Not only is it a frickin' badass accessory in that you can just spend some time building it, it has no inherent use. Effectively.
You said that.
It is simply there to look cool, but having this and spending the time building it up and sort of adding it to your collection is absolutely fantastic. Equally, if you take into account that things like RPG tokens and maps and stuff like that are inherently a cool accessory, this can actually be used to play a D&D adventure on it using the characters and the monsters and everything else that you see in here. Is it slightly more expensive? Yes. But inherently, for sheer enjoyment level and detail and the fact that it is fairly pointless in the grand scheme of things as well, I think this is an absolutely phenomenal bit of kit that they brought out this year. Because
I have to say, I'm dead set against miniatures and gaming for RPGs, but if anybody wants to do this, go nuts.
Exactly. And if we can convince Jerry that this is a good idea to include to do with role playing, then I think we've done a good job.
Look, there's a racist elf thieving a key. That guy's
from
come
that
home.
Just normal half orc, yeah.
Yep.
So yeah.
Typical elves.
But yeah, just sort of like again, I'm supposed to be a little bit sensible, I suppose. Although why would you be sensible? I just think it's a phenomenal.
Cube. There he is.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal bit of kit for like a D&D player or a D&D group that kind of just wants to show off a little bit and have a bit of fun. The fact that it can be usable in game is great, I think, and a lot of people already use Lego bits in order to set up adventures and stuff.
There they are.
Really nice.
Look.
There they go. Look at those people who definitely play D&D.
100%
Lego. But then it's also got the fun factor to it as well, and a gaming accessory doesn't necessarily have to be useful. It could be a one-shot thing. And I think just having something like this on your shelf would be a really nice sort of addition to your existing hobby
Yeah.
collection. And you know what would be really good, right?
Yes.
All those dungeon masters who spend hours and hours toiling away, writing stories, building encounters and everything else like that.
All of
Do they
that.
get any love? No. How many of you are in your gaming group? Maybe 4, 5 of you. Split the cost of that. Buy it for your dungeon master. Make them very happy indeed.
That sounds very personal, Ben. That
It's almost like I'm telling my D&D group to maybe spend some money on me.
I see it. I'm
But yeah,
with you. Yep.
Something a bit left field, but
Yeah.
I think it's pretty cool.
Little bit woo, little bit wee.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, accessories, nice to have, not essential.
No,
And I mean, that very much is the epitome of all of that.
exactly.
Definitely not essential. Really
Yeah.
nice to have. The gelatinous cube is possibly my favorite Lego
Inherently,
thing ever. It's
if
just a
nothing
skull
else,
in the middle of
that
it.
is a reason to buy that.
people are just going to start sending gelatinous cubes to you now, Jerry.
Yeah.
On
feel
top of
free.
fleshing, like I think this is a whole new thing this year.
Yes. I'm 100% on board with all of that. Right. Those are our nominations.
Yes.
And these are our winners and runners-up. Starting with our runner-up for Best Accessory of 2024. And it is the Speed Paint Pens from Deep Cut Studios and the Army Painter.
Yes.
Taking the stress out of painting, just get back to colouring in. Hand them to your kids. Go colour in my miniatures.
If only to annoy the negative comments on the review. Yes,
Yep.
I'll for that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they can do one. Right. We have to have a winner, though. And we, after long consideration of how many people we could annoy, have given the winner of the Best Accessory to the Dungeons and Dragons Red Dragon's Tail.
It's so cool and yet pointless.
It's got a beholder. Why would you not want a Lego beholder?
Just by sheer fun factor
Yes.
and the fact that it can actually be useful in a game, I think is brilliant.
There are so many stop motion Lego animations
Yes.
on the internet already.
Yes.
I'm assuming if there isn't already, we won't be far away from seeing a D&D one.
Mhm.
Maybe they could redo the entire D&D film. Okay, we are back for our next category. And this time round, Ben, it is board games.
Yeah.
Yay.
It's been an interesting year for board games. The first of the games that we're going to be looking at for this sort of rundown is Joyride Survival of the Fastest, which is by the folks at Rebellion Unplugged. Now, this game went through crowdfunding and all sorts of other things, and it had its official release last year, which is very awesome. And as well as the core set, there's a whole host of additional things that have been released for this as well. Bundles and bundles of expansions and all sorts of different things. But it went down exceptionally well at things like UK Games Expo and all that kind of stuff, and it's earned plenty of plaudits. For those people who don't know, Joyride is a racing game of sorts, but in the kind of destruction derby style affair, in that you'll be driving around the track, but you can effectively complete it in whichever way you see fit. So you have gates that are set up around that you have to pass through, but you could spin through those backwards. You could reverse through them. You could drive through them straight forward. You could shove somebody through there if you wanted to as well.
Or you can turn tight on turn 1 and send someone careening into a wall and ruin
Exactly.
the entire game.
Yes.
John, looking at you.
But effectively, it's a big old destruction derby style affair. And in the core game, at least, it's for between 2 to 4 players, but you can sort of expand things and change it as you see fit.
God, adding more people would be so mad.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun playing this with the creator and stuff, and it was really cool sort of driving around and seeing his face as you were like, you want to do what now?
Yes.
One of the other nice things about it is that it's kind of got like a dice manipulation element to it as well. So like you roll the dice to see what you're going to get, and then you can kind of lock them into different areas of your dashboard effectively. And it's a really nice spin on sort of traditional racing games. So we've had things like Formula D in the past, which is a dice fairing affair, very kind of like breezy, sort of sit down, play it with a bunch of people, beer and pretzel style. Then there's been other games out over the last year or so, like Heat, or I think that was actually in 2023 as well. But Heat was a little bit more sort of in-depth card management style. And I think Joyride managed to kind of nail that in-between spot between the likes of something like Formula D and Heat and give you that kind of fun, exciting over-the-top experience on the tabletop. I think another thing that makes it so fascinating is just the art style. They really went to town on making this as like big and boisterous as possible. And when you combine that with all the kind of weird, chaotic stuff that you can do on the tabletop at the same time, they've created something that's actually quite special as like a game to sort of dive into and play.
And it's a great intro game for kids as well.
Yes, very true.
Nice, big, chunky wooden meeples. For people who want to do Gaslands but don't want to start handing the super glue over to an 8-year-old to stick a machine gun to their head.
You're not allowed to raid my Matchbox collection just yet.
It's a good way of going. And you still have things like the teams there. You can play it with like a generic team, or there are supplemental teams where they're slightly different drivers. So you might get, some gung-ho drivers and other ones who are a bit more steady Eddie. And depending on how detailed you want it to be, you can slide some in, slide some out.
I think the best thing about this game for me is that it's one of those games where it makes it okay to screw over your friends because you all can do it. Everyone has equal opportunity for screwing each other over.
That is true.
That just adds to the fun because it's that good gotcha where it's I got you, are you going to get me back now? And I think that really enhances what the gameplay is for this one.
Yeah, very true. There's some really fun stuff in the kind of expansion packs that they've done that kind of add sort of weird elements, like you could be driving around a zoo being pursued by a mutant gorilla and all sorts of different things like that, or like dinosaurs and all sorts of different stuff. But it's definitely worth checking out if you're interested in the idea of racing games, but with a little bit of a twist. And they've actually got a really nice like 2-player variant as well. So Survival of the Fastest is kind of like the core game, but there's also one for just 2 people to dive in and play. So if you just tend to play games with your partner or something, then that's one that you definitely want to go and check out. But yeah, Joyride, very fun little game. Make sure to go and watch our Let's Plays. They're really fun.
Yes.
So, I think we had. Did we do 1 or 2 for this game?
I think we did 2.
Sure we
did a 1v1 and then did a demolition derby.
So that was the first of our entries. The next one comes from the folks at Mantic Games, and this was another one that we had a little bit of chaotic fun with in the form of Worms, the board game.
Nice.
So this hit like a truck again, exceptionally well funded over on Kickstarter, and they did a really nice job at in its first printing at retail as well, which is very nice. In essence, it is everything that you really liked about the classic game of Worms, just distilled into a tabletop game with all the weird luck and explosions and screwing people over, prodding them off the edge of the map, destroying terrain and everything else. And it was fascinating seeing how the designers had been able to bring all that to the tabletop in such an interesting way, because it doesn't feel like a game that initially you'd think would translate as well as it has over onto the tabletop. But I think they did a really good job with it. As you might imagine, it's got all the different cards that you'll be playing for, all things like bazookas and shotguns and dynamite and everything else in between. And then you obviously got to deal with things like the wind and all that kind of stuff as well, which will send your explosives and everything else off in different directions and make things very, very bad for you as well. And as Justin pointed out, during the course of the game, it felt like you could get very, very bullied in this.
No, because this is, again, all right, we seem to have a theme developing here where games where it's okay to screw over your mates are fun. But no, this one, they nailed the art style, they nailed the gameplay, the mechanics were fabulous. And even just down to even how the game starts, that initial chaos of, okay, we're all going to start deploying stuff. And you're not tactically deploying because you can't. You physically can't because you don't know which team you're on.
Yes.
I think that just, it adds elements to this game where you are not playing hardcore. You cannot play a hardcore meta game with this just because of how it's designed, and that keeps everything a lot more fun. There's less hard feelings whenever it's, oh, it happened to me, rather than, oh, I had this big master plan and it failed. That's what I love about this game, is it really embodies the chaos, the same as Joyride. So
it was, as I say, it's a really nice way for them to kind of replicate the feel of the video game on the tabletop.
I do want to see someone homebrew a 3D board for this, like the old wormed bases you used to get in WMD.
One of the other things that I really liked about it as well is that whilst the chaos of like maybe a 4-player game might feel like it could potentially take a really long time to play, in actual fact, it plays out like a breeze.
Hmm.
Like our Let's Play of it was pretty over in a flash, to be honest, even with the teach. And so that means that you could throw in multiple sessions of this over the course of an evening. So even if you do get screwed over, or maybe everyone dies in the first couple of turns or something from explosions that were never your fault because you just got pushed into the mines, you can dive in and start playing the game again very quickly and have some fun with it. So again, it was one of those games where very good for people who love worms and are coming back at it from a kind of like retro angle, but also really good for families and all that kind of thing as well, which is really nice.
I want to keep an eye on it in the coming year because I would love to see some expansions to it. So new types of worms, new types of weapons, new types of like map tiles and stuff. That can
I've got all of those already. So don't worry.
Jerry is the Kickstarter baby. So
so there are they've done about 50 worms. So the core set has 4 types, which are used for all 4 teams. But they've done a whole host, like one carrying the banana bomb, one carrying the sheep. They've done the goats. They've done all weird and wacky worms that you will have seen if you played the computer game. So they'll be coming out at some point. There are new map tiles, including, and they're double-sided. So there's a new sort of world to drop on. Ronnie even announced recently that worms will be one of the Christmas advent calendars this year. So they'll have their Kings of War Barroom Brawl. They'll have their Deep Space Pest Control and Worms and one other that they refused to mention. They beeped Ronnie every time he mentioned it. So you've got to have some secrets.
Worms, the board game from Mantic Games, absolutely fantastic one there as well. The last of our sort of clutch that were up for nomination is a Games Workshop game. And this one is Warhammer Underworlds, which got its new edition towards the tail end of last year. Warhammer Underworlds has been around for a number of years now. It had its first edition with Shadespire, which was out, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. Maybe a little bit less. But essentially, it's a hybrid game. So it's a mixture of a card game, a board game, and a miniature style game as well at the tabletop. Essentially, you get a set of models that ranges from about 3 models up to maybe 10, or between 8 and 10 for some of the larger warbands. And they all have very distinct abilities on their cards alongside their war scrolls, which give you sort of faction rules. And then one of the really nice things about the game is that they've kind of boiled it down into what makes Warhammer Underworlds fun, and that is the thematic nature of each of the warbands, but also the pick up and play nature of the game as well. So what they've done is they've kind of changed the format of what essentially is like a rivals deck in the last edition into the new edition, where you pick up a set of cards, and that's the set of cards that you play with. Kind of think about like Keyforge and stuff from the previous.
Oh, so they've took away the deck building aspect.
Yeah, well, there is a little bit of deck building in there as well, but in essence, that has also been kind of boiled down to its kind of like core essence as well.
That's good. I did feel it was a little heavy in the earlier editions.
Yeah. And it also means that you don't necessarily have to go out there and buy endless packs of cards in order to feel like you're keeping up with things. Because if you've got a warband that works with a particular rivals deck very well, you just stick with that. You just get that deck and away you go. It makes it very easy to pick up and play, and really good for tournaments and all that kind of thing as well. There is the deck building in there still. So essentially with that, you take 2 rivals decks, you mash them together, and that's the card pool that you've got to choose from in order to build your deck. So even then, you've got this thing where it's like, well, I'm not having to pick from 5-6 different sets of cards in order to make one deck. You've only essentially got to pick between the 2. The other thing they've done with it as well is that they've kind of streamlined the gameplay too. So they've taken out a lot of the weird niggles and stuff that were in the previous editions of the game to make it just flow a lot smarter. So all the stuff that was kind of like weird about the old game, so the naming of certain tokens and the way that actions work, has been made very quick and easy to play. The other thing they did is that they didn't invalidate anything that had come out previously. So all of the old warbands that you still have can still be played in this game. So if you have a whole bunch of models like I do on the shelf behind me, literally right there, then you can sort of bring them to table and start playing them with stuff that you can download online as well, which is a really nice touch. Slightly more pricey than some of the other games that we've seen, obviously. But what's quite nice about Underworlds as a whole is that, as well as it being a quick and fun and easy game to play, we've got this really nice element of card play alongside the dice rolling and the miniature movement and all that kind of thing on the tactical map. It's also a really nice one for hobbyists, because if you want to dive into the world of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, but you don't necessarily know whether or not you want to go whole hog for a faction like the Stormcast Eternals or the Seraphon, for example, you could just pick up one of these really nice sets of miniatures, and they give you between 3 and 8 wonderfully sculpted press together miniatures that you can sort of paint up and have some fun with, or you can just leave them in their bare plastic and just play as you see fit, because they're all color coded, which is quite nice. And what you see a lot of that at tournaments as well. It's a great game to take down to the pub, as I have done multiple times.
How many weird looks do you get?
You have a couple of people coming over going, "What on earth are you guys doing?" But then they go, "Oh, that's cool," and then they wander off and probably go, "Weirdos."
All right, so what's the cutoff time for whenever the pints are in and the people's screwing aroundness?
We've never played it that late in the night. We've always played it during the day when the pub is quiet. So,
see, big brain,
sensible.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a really nice update to an existing format for Games Workshop, and we thought it was worth recognizing the fact that they done a pretty bang up job of bringing Warhammer Underworlds to more people, and also satisfying both the old and new crowd for the game as well, I think, at the same time.
Smashing. So those are 3 nominations then?
Yes.
However, we now have to pick. So who is our runner-up?
So the runner-up for Best Board Game of 2024 goes to the folks at Rebellion Unplugged for Joyride Survival of the Fastest. We had an excellent time with the game, as we've already said. Really great concept. Love the idea that it was a kind of race game with a twist, bringing to life a lot of those kind of like old retro days of Destruction Derby and stuff on consoles and stuff, and playing around with that format. And just as you said, crazy fun where you can sort of like, not feel too bad about screwing over your friends, which is
it gives you a reason to go after them.
So yes, congratulations to Rebellion Unplugged for that one. Joyride, absolutely fantastic game.
Also, great song.
Yes. So now I suppose we have to choose our winner.
Yes.
Do we have to? I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. So the winner of Best Board Game of 2024 goes to Mantic Games.
Yay!
And Worms the board game. I think it was inevitable, considering the amount of fun we had with this, that it was going to earn that top spot. Again, the chaos and the brilliant sort of translation of the old digital game into a tabletop format was absolutely fantastic. Credit to the folks at Caesar Inc. who helped design that as well, alongside the team at Mantic, who did an exceptional job with that. And I reckon they're probably going to do something similar in terms of the genius with Assassin's Creed as we move into the rest of this year as well. So, some really cool stuff coming up from Mantic Games on that front. But yeah, handling licensed properties really nicely, doing justice to them, and really giving across that kind of Worms feel as part of that board game. So congratulations to the folks at Mantic.
And if you didn't have the chance to pick it up, because they sold out everything they've done so quickly, it will be back in stock from February onwards. It's the WB print run. So well worth picking up. Well done, Mantic. All right, then, our next category, probably the one most people are here for, let's face it.
Let's see the spike in the viewership at this point on the video, isn't there? Yeah.
It is, of course, the best miniatures game for 2024. This is always a complicated and tricksy one.
It really is.
We've managed to whittle it down, like a bunch of whittlers, to 3 potential nominations. The first of which comes from James Morris and the guys over at Ricefitz Press, aka the Lardies, with Midgard Heroic Battles. Now, Midgard is interesting in that it's both historical and it's fantastical, and often people say never the twain shall meet. But in this case, they really should. It's a grand battle style game that relies on the fact that anytime anybody reads anything about historical medieval / back battles, they tend to be almost saga-esque in that you hear an awful lot about what the Black Prince did at Cressy, or what happened with Hector and Paris when they were trying to defend Troy and things like that. You always get the hero's point of view, and with Midgard, the idea behind it is to lean into that. It is about the heroes and the forces they're leading. However, it is not Hero Hammer, in that a hero will not ever run into a unit and destroy them. They're not capable of it. So don't panic there.
No plot armor.
Yeah, but it is an expensive. Oh, don't mention plot armor. I so wanted Star Schlock in here. Anyway, that's one of their rules. But the idea behind Midgard is you've got your heroes with their forces. There's a certain amount of command and control involved with it as they fight back and forth, and try and gain glory as they do so. And that glory is taken from your opponent. So you both start with a set amount of glory, and then there's a bit of a tug of war as you attempt to wrest control of the battlefield from them via your clever maneuvering. Really interesting mechanics with the likes of the glory and that sort of thing, but at the same time, sort of simplified and throttled back. So it's not a tournament-based game. James has said himself he doesn't want it to be a tournament-based game. There are a lot of those out there, the very exactitude of DBX and L'Art de la Guerre and things like that. This is a game that's more narrative, more story-based. It's a game that actually started about 6 years or more ago, where he would run big games at conventions, the likes of Salute or Partisan or whatever, with a group of friends. And this was the sort of the core rule set that he created to run big, extravagant participation games that people could come and play. So it's very simple to play. It's easy to get into. And then over 5 years, it's been refined, written down, ripped up, put back together again, until they've ended up with this very simple to pick up historical game. And if you want to go full fantasy, you can. If you want your fantasy light, you can. If you don't want any fantasy at all, you can. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like you're losing anything by keeping them separate. They're written in such a way that it's not carving a huge chunk of the game out, like Warhammer, for example, where the magic phase was separate unto itself, and you could just drop a whole phase out of the game sometimes and people wouldn't notice. Same sort of idea. You can add the bits you need to add in without losing the feel of the game itself, and because it's been designed to work off spear lengths, it means you can chop and change scale wise. So if you want to play 28s, you can go for the big 28s. If you want to play 6 mil,
I have an army
2
sitting
mil,
waiting ready.
you can absolutely go nuts with those. But you've got a couple of units sitting ready.
I really liked the toolkit nature of it as well. So it kind of follows that format of a lot of, historical games, I suppose, actually, of its type, where it's kind of, you can build however you like in order to satisfy the fantasy or historical games you're playing, and or as you say, a mix of the two. But then they do also have stuff in there for people who are maybe just coming to it from the first time and want to have themselves like a solid list for dwarves or elves and things. So you can use that as a basis to work from. But it was a really nice set of rules that came out towards the tail end of last year, and I think it hit like a truck. I think a lot of people have started building armies to play the game, which is a really nice thing to say about something. So it covers all the bases for historical players who tend to be a crusty, sad lot. Well, we are. We don't like things being tweaked or changed too often. However, it works beautifully for that group who want something that plays like a medieval or ancient game, and it forces you, the mechanics force you to play in a way that makes sense for the period. Very rarely did armies get completely wiped out, with the exception of Pyrrhus. We're looking at you. In the majority of the time, I mean, even things like the 100 Years' War, most of the battles ended where the majority of people were still alive on both sides. Even Agincourt is a famous one, where the French absolutely got hammered. When the battle ended and the French were beat, they still had about double the number of troops on the battlefield that the English did. So Midgard takes that into account. You don't just pulverize your opponent until they've lifted all their toys off. There's a back and forth, and then obviously somebody gains the upper hand and they win the game. But it's not about running forward and just pushing people to their deaths, which I think is very important. Yeah, so it's not a murder game. No, although people will get murdered, which is good. Our second nomination then is not quite as historically accurate. What?
Well, now here's the thing.
Yes.
Because video games are now a part of history. So if it's accurate to the video game, it is technically historically accurate.
Yeah, but it's in the future. It's another one from Mantic, shockingly.
It is, yeah.
And Mantic has been rocking it.
Yeah. This is another game that absolutely blew people out of the water and absolutely blew Mantic's planning out of the water. So Halo Flashpoint is the beginning of the Halo universe on the tabletop. The idea is you put your Spartans onto the table up against your opponent, and then absolutely slap the living bejesus out of them. In anywhere to, 1v1 to maybe a 4-player side, or any mix thereof. The models are big and chunky. The system itself works off Dead Zone, with modifications. The biggest modification is the scale change. It still uses the same 2x2 board that Dead Zone does, the 3-inch cubes, but the models are bigger so they can sort of better represent the Spartans from Halo.
Yeah.
And then as such, they've restricted things like the number of models that can fit into a cube. So instead of having your maybe 4-a-side models pounding each other in a cube, like in Dead Zone, I think you're limited to 2 or 1 in the case of some particularly big beasties that may be coming. The initial one is just the sort of the battle arena with your various types of games like the Capture the Flag or King of the Hill or
Oddball.
Oddball,
like
everybody's favorite Oddball.
Oddball.
Yes. But they're moving on from that. So people who got the Spartan edition, which had all the bells and whistles from the Kickstarter, includes some things like the elites and some of the other Spartan types. A really fun example, again, of replicating something on the tabletop in a very slick way that leans into what makes it different from Dead Zone. So obviously the mechanics are there, but how does it set itself apart? How does it play like the computer game? Well, respawns. When you get killed, dropping your weapon, your enemy can pick it up or can just ignore it and run off. If you get spawn camped in, unlucky son. Yeah, things like that. And then the unique scoring. So there's always been progressive scoring in Dead Zone anyway, but having it in Halo where maybe you want to go push for the objectives because of the respawning, you can't just kill your opponent and therefore win because they're always coming back. And if you kill them in a turn where they haven't activated, then they're coming straight back into the fight. If you kill them in the turn they have activated, they're going to be off to the side, waiting on that little timer ticking down until the next turn. But then they'll be coming right back at you. And they've done a terrific job with both the gameplay, those adaptations and changes, and the models themselves. Big, colourful, chunky plastic figures, so that anybody who isn't into modelling, again, like Underworlds, don't have to worry about actually painting.
No,
you
can
just
go set them up on the tabletop.
Here's blue, here's red.
Yeah,
well, I mean, it's always been the balance that board gamers might not be miniatures gamers. So doing this, it's more inclusive for a wider spectrum of the gaming community. But honestly, this makes me want to go back and watch the old Red versus Blue series on YouTube.
It's a puma.
See, red and blue, whenever I was a kid, were 2 plasticine cats.
We've come on slightly since then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another one of the things that I think was really quite good about this is that we've talked about the accessibility in terms of the miniatures and stuff, but I think Mantic did a really nice job as part of that initial core set of making it quite inviting for somebody who's maybe never played a miniature style game before, because you have that side of the map where it essentially lists down everything that you need to do. So if you're coming to a miniatures game for the first time, maybe you're a Halo fan from back in the day, or even now with, the newer Halos and stuff, it's definitely worth checking out and seeing whether or not, this could be something for you, because, as a Halo fan, it's pretty
It really
easy to
does
dive in
hold
and
your
have some
hand
fun.
through gaming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then from there, you just flip the mat over, mix up where the terrain sits, and try different missions, and step away from your standard deathmatch.
They even had their first tournament in January.
We did.
So
very nice.
So yes, great things ahead for Halo, I have no doubt. Our final nomination for Best Miniatures Game this year comes from Corvus Belli and the delightful boop, boop.
You just love saying it that way, don't you?
Yes. And that is Warcrow.
Yeah.
So the war game version of Warcrow Adventures hits the tabletop with a whole world's worth of fantasy goodness to actually get involved with. There's so much to say about this, starting with the miniatures, I suppose. They are absolutely gorgeous. They have a really nice take on them. They have a very Warcraft feel to me, especially with the likes of the orcs being, I'm not going to say noble savage because they're orcs, but they're less knuckle dragging grunters. They actually can, form coherent sentences, that sort of thing.
Full blown tribal society.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Although obviously the worst kind of scum ever. But able to open the world
that's
up.
the hegemony. I don't know what you're talking
about. I don't think it is. I think you'll find you're wrong.
All I'm going to say is watching Magic users in this game is whoa, calm down. Why is that a nuke?
It's all fine. We're all fine here. The miniatures are great. The mechanics of the game are really, really interesting. It has a lot of similarities between Aristea and between Warcrow Adventures, with the way the sort of the dice mechanics work within the game. So you have custom dice where you have various types of hits, misses, blocks, and crits. That's very Aristea-esque, where you're working on successes to failures sort of thing, but you're also having to look out for triggers for abilities within the dice rolling for your guys. But at the same time, they have this turn tracker that came from the adventure game, where it monitors all sorts of things within the game, because it's a very narrative-driven fantasy campaign. Obviously, you can't just point your stuff up and go and run at each other like two slabs of meat, just slapping against each other. But if you want to be slightly more interesting than that, then the campaign, the turns tick. As they tick, then you'll get told that this happens. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a squall comes in and all of a sudden range shooting is restricted for turns. Triggers for magic kick off, and they have set timers on them. So it's a very neat way of tracking everything that's happening on the board without ending up with a whole asteroid belt of tokens following all of your figures, which nobody wants to see.
Yeah, Death by Token is kind of old school now.
Yeah. So it's a really nice little tracker, and you can see where the better initiative, faster characters get to operate multiple times before slower or maybe more unwieldy characters. So it gives you the feel of an elf being faster than a dwarf, because they're just going to be triggering more often. And obviously magic is perfectly natural, fine, and has no downsides at all as far as I can tell.
Nope. Keep piling on piling on the bad.
Tinge.
Yeah,
every spell is a buff. And,
fireball.
Yeah.
Well, you are now no longer cold.
Yeah.
There's your buff.
True.
It's a good buff. It's a great buff to have.
One of the other things that I quite liked about it as well is that it stays in the same wheelhouse as Infinity, in that you're not overloading yourself with miniatures.
Yeah, it keeps your forces manageable.
Yeah, you've got a small-ish warband that you're using on a relatively compact table as well, so you can really go to town on painting the figures and working on really nice terrain pieces.
It will be interesting to see how it expands out beyond the initial factions, the initial releases for each faction, just to see what are you adding, what are you changing, what are your options to actually do the Infinity thing and actually have some meta in there and actually play with, if I take this many of this unit, if I take that many of that unit, if I take that wizard instead of that wizard, will I burn them better?
Towards the end of 2024, they'd added in quite a few expansion stuff for both the hegemony of Embasig and the northern tribes and stuff. So you've got quite a few options if you wanted to take slightly more elite routes or play with different characters. As we move deeper into 2025, they've already done some stuff for the Yalda Boath, which is kind of like their sort of undead demonic faction, and they've also teased that the elves are very, very close to coming out alongside the likes of the dwarves as well, in more numbers. So keep an eye out for that, because that'll start to expand things beyond just the two core factions. So,
I mean, we've seen how they've done it with Infinity, where options upon options are there. So I'm excited to see where it goes this year.
It's very simple compared to Infinity.
Yes.
You buy a unit, the unit is a set size.
Yep.
If you buy a hero, you've two choices. The hero can either run solo or can be attached to units. And if they're attached to units, they have a different stat line, which is essentially a buff for the unit. And they're all done via cards. So you just slip the hero card underneath the unit card, and it just tells you what the additional dice and what the additional abilities are. So for somebody just getting in, you're not having to deal with the minutiae of, I've got 12 points left. What if I drop a crossbow off that guy? That'll give me 15 points, and then I can take this fellow with a none of that. It's just two guys in that unit. Well, then there's two guys in that unit until one of them gets killed.
So it's broader strokes for your actual tactical choices.
Yeah. So it makes life much more interesting in that regards.
Yeah, definitely.
And the world building is insane. The rules themselves are about 40 pages, and the rule book is close to 300, I want to say. Might actually be over 300, of which the other 240, 260 pages are all background world stories, that sort of thing. So they really have gone absolutely whole hog in creating a fantasy world.
You two can go and watch going through all of the lore over on their YouTube channel. So.
Yes. Well worth it.
And getting into character as well.
Yes. Right. Those are nominations.
Mm-hmm.
And our runner-up is Warcrow from Corvus Belli.
I expected this one to be very tight.
Yes, it was.
Tight as a duck's arse.
There's a saying I haven't heard in a beat.
There we go.
But yeah,
in a beat.
So Warcrow, cracking fantasy game from Corvus Belli, and well worth a visit for anybody who's fancying getting into that world, giving it a run around, and then setting all their friends on fire. It's good times. But there can only be one winner, and that is, of course, Midgard Heroic Battles.
I'm actually quite surprised.
Yes.
I mean, Halo is such a big name.
It is a big name. However, I don't go by big names.
Oh, I know.
We looked at it, we chewed the fat, and we were like, you know what? I think Midgard's going to be an outstanding one. Mm-hmm. And James has plans this year as well. So obviously the uptake has been huge in the last couple of months of last year, just from its release. Mm-hmm. People have been seeing it since last year. I think the first games were teased or shown off anyway.
Awesome Rainbow Bridge tabletop that they built and all sorts.
Well, that was it. They had two boards side by side, one pure historic and one
a 15 mil Dark Age one, and then the Rainbow Bridge
and then
one,
the Rainbow Bridge,
the Vikings,
the Viking heroic saggery fantasy one side by side, showing just how you can play them. But he already has plans for supplementary material. The first of which is going to be a campaign system.
Very nice.
Yes,
just a generic campaign system. I'm really looking forward to Midgard, and I think for a massed battle game, people hear mass battle and then the panic sets in. But because you are building to specific base sizes, you can be flagrant in your minimalism when it comes to actually what you're putting on the tabletop. So, if you want to take that army you've got, Justin, and spread them out over the umpteen units to make a full game, you can. There's nothing stopping you because you're just going.
They are an Irish force, so I could just run them as the Fianna.
Go full bread branch. But yes, it's a very accessible step into historic gaming, and it'll be fascinating to see who comes into historics off the back of this, because I think this is one where people can go, well, I've got existing fantasy figures for whatever game it is. I fancy giving this a go, and then you could just segue into historics off the back of it because the mechanics and the rules are that good.
Well, all historical factions will have their mythic creatures that they can be adding in, so there's a lot to go and explore and play with.
I'm not even saying about building a historic force with I'm saying start by just playing fantasy. Just use the toolkit that's there to try the mechanics. Because if you've been playing a game for a while, if you've been playing Kings, if you've been playing Warhammer, Conquest, whatever, and you've got figures sitting around, they can be used. All you need to do is make sure that you and your opponent have equivalent base sizes. And because it's not a tournament game, you don't need to be too fussy. If you're running stuff that's 80 mil wide and they've got something that's 90 mil wide, it's close enough.
Much of a muchness.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
My thinking is it's a good opportunity if there's factions that people want to explore and miss that they've been curious about. This is one that could lead you down that rabbit hole really nicely.
100%. So there we go. That is the best game of miniatures 2024. Midgard Heroic Battles. Well done, Mr. Morris. Okay, everyone, we are back once again for our next category. One very dear to my heart. And Dana Warren's as well, which is why he's here.
Very much so.
And it is, of course, the Indie of the Year.
Yeah.
And this is where we go back through 50-odd indie companies that we've looked at.
Oh, God, yeah.
And then have to try and go, you were better than the rest. I'm sorry.
All our favourites, like a proud parent. Yeah.
Yes. Now, Lloyd isn't here, so we've chose indies where you can actually see what's going on. If he had been, maybe it would be
There's no tiny
choice.
pictures.
Tiny pictures, websites designed in 1985 for BBC Micro. But yes, we have our 3 nominations. And first up, we're going to go for a touch of the tabletop gaming. And this comes courtesy of Tabletop Skirmish Games.
Yeah.
So, as indies go, this is Compact and Bijou. It's 2 brothers. Have been putting a lot of time and effort into this. So I believe it's Lee and Nick. One does the rules writing, the other does a lot of the creative design work and artwork. And they've been absolutely hammering out a ton of games. The ones that caught our eye as the indie was Rogue Warriors, which was a fascinating modern combat set of rules, something that you could adapt, though, to play any of your sort of Iranian sieges, that sort of thing. Or if you wanted to play some of the SAS 1940s early commando raids, you could do that as well with it. And it really was just so adorable, because I have several of the books, not all of them though, because they have been firing them out at a rate of knots. You can see the rule set itself is a really nicely designed thing, but more importantly, really accessible, easy to pick up, and with a ton of options in there. So when they were designing a game, they wanted something that was very rules light, but massively adaptable.
Yeah.
So you could play out your games of Rogue Warriors across a whole gamut and be as realistic or as, I'm not going to say fantasy,
Hollywood?
as you like. Hollywood is a great way of doing it. And nothing epitomized this more than the narrative campaign
Tiger Blood.
If you've ever seen the award-winning Charlie Sheen, obviously the award he gave was himself for the amount of drugs he could take. But if you've ever seen him in Navy SEALs, you will know precisely what's going on here. It's 1980s. A group of elite US troops are sent in to do the mission. In this case, you've got a whole narrative campaign based around it, which was just absolutely fantastic. And I really like the design aesthetics throughout the books as well, because you have a really nice narrative background and these little pictures popped in here, there, and everywhere.
It's beautifully designed. Really, accessibility is not just about simple rules. It's about how the rules are presented as well. And that's one of the things I really like about this. You know, it's that and the fact, look, let's be clear here. I grew up on this stuff. The Iranian embassy siege happened whenever I was a kid, and it turned the SAS into basically superheroes. After that, you then had nothing but special forces movies. So you had your Chuck Norris in Delta Force. You had Charlie Sheen in Navy SEALs. You had Predator. Oh, we are rescue team, not assassins. I grew up with these guys who were effectively superheroes with M16s, and it's just so cool. And even right up till today, Jerry, you were talking about the Iranian embassy siege. You could do the Bin Laden raid with SEAL Team 6 with this, you know, it's and shoot Bin Laden in his pants. Man, you can
go the whole hog.
So many options.
And for those of us who these days find difficult getting opponents for things, they released Ungentlemanly Warriors, which is solo/co-op adaptation for the rules, and a campaign to go with. This is set in around World War II. But then these rules can be used to tack on to any of the other books that they've released subsequently. So you can take your modern fighting. You can do your Marine Force Recon in the first Gulf War. You can take your Generation Kill and play it solo if you want, and make up the rules for that. Obviously, the modern combat stuff was what drew me in, but subsequent to that, they've also done a set of fantasy rules as well, and also Evolution, which takes the modern combat and pushes it into future
stuff.
So
Nice.
you can have your mecha and
a bit XCOM maybe.
Big style combat armors and bits and pieces like that. So really, really meaty set of rules coming out of tabletop skirmish games. Our second nomination is part of a company, shall we say?
Yeah.
So this is Ramshackle. Ramshackle do a ton of resin bits and pieces for a whole host of apocalyptic sci-fi fantasy games, but specifically the community casting project side of things is fascinating. As you can see, there's a whole host of names attached to it already, but this is a really interesting way of people getting their miniatures produced. And essentially what you do is, if you want to actually get a model made and sold, send it to Curtis. He'll cast it up. You'll get copies. And then he has the sort of the license to produce it on the website. But the license remains the purview of the sculptor. So at any point you can turn around and go, no, I want that. I want that taken down now. Or, that I want to go a different way, whatever it happens to be. But for people actually wanting to have something produced that's a little bit personal, and then made
a little bit quirky.
Very quirky.
Yeah.
Then the casting, the community casting project has just been fantastic. Oh, a tiny picture. I'm a very, very big man. I'd like to point out, I remember coming across this via the medium of, and I'll have to go right back to the very start for this. There's a guy on YouTube, Five Header, Irish fella, who does a lot of weird sculpts, and you can see some weird and wacky things in here. And he had, do you remember those terrifying elder Teletubbies we looked at in an indie?
Yes. Yeah.
He had this, and he called it the Toe Tickler. And it cropped up. He was doing some stuff on his YouTube channel, and then all of a sudden this appeared on Ramshackle as something that you two could buy. For whatever reason.
Absolutely bizarre. Tickle some toes, Jerry.
Yeah, very much so. Look how happy he is, toe tickling.
I know, yeah. What's so nice about this is that it allows so many small creators who may be doing one-off pieces to get that one miniature that everyone loved from maybe their YouTube video or their Instagram post or something that they kind of kit bashed themselves or sculpted themselves, done in a professional way by Ramshackle, and then it becomes available to everyone else out there as well. The other thing is that there are so many small indie games now that are all done in that kind of garage style, where it's all just done in the back of a garage or in the back of a shed, or it's scribbled on some paper, that they did in a cafe at 3:00 in the morning or something, when they just come out of a concert or whatever, and they're like, this would be a cool idea for a game. That kind of stuff gets an extra bit of life thanks to what Ramshackle are doing here. And the fact that they're doing it in such a nice way as to be like, hey, we'll just send you a bunch of these, and then we get the license to just add it to our web store. But essentially you get your stock of stuff to sell it maybe at your local convention or something like that. So,
and the thing for players of things like Sludge and bits and pieces like that, where they're looking for weird turnipy heads
Turnip 28.
To be stuck onto Napoleonics or that sort of thing. Getting stuff like this is terrific, because going to a figure sculptor and going, I want you to make me a set of heads and then cast them and all the rest, and it's an expensive business. And then sometimes I'm sure there are a lot of companies would look at some things and go, where's the commercial value in doing that? And this opens it up to a whole slew of people. I'd actually like to point out the resin was essentially the bit you throw away the resin
It's now
gate.
something that you can use. Yeah.
It's a scenery piece, is it?
He does this a lot. So with the science fiction and post-apocalyptic bits, they tend to be like broken barricades and stuff.
Uh-huh.
So that big chunk of resin that you normally clip off and wing in the bin, you can clip off and then use as a bit of terrain or add it to a base or something like that. So it cuts down on the waste as well. It's really inspiring just to see Ramshackle just helping people get their ideas out there. And you'll find all sorts of weird and wacky stuff. There's some spectacular looking.
The pug tank is one of my favorites. I think
the pug tank's nice. I'll get the scrap tank, I suppose, and get the sausage fingers just to show people. What?
Sausage fingers and toe ticklers.
Yeah, because that is what people want to see with an indie. They want to go, where can I find some toe ticklers and sausage fingers? And I mean, that thing coming at you across the battlefield, I mean, that's not right. I do like the fact he's got his
I already wanted you to come to tea.
Did I mention you are T? With his massive mace.
Hiding that behind his leg.
Hiding the hammer behind him.
Yes. It's the only way to do it. Yeah. But that's beautiful. And then the pug tank is, I mean, I'm not going to say it's nightmare fuel, but it may be fueled by nightmares. So, I mean, that's all good as well. And I mean, there are weird and wacky games out there that are being published all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just going, well, the Doomed, for example, I'm fairly certain that could come in as one of the crazy monsters from the Doom that will just eat everyone.
It's created a really nice collective of creatives, which I think is really harking back to early GWE Warhammer days, Rogue Trader era, where people just kind of made stuff up and it made it into cool, and that got turned into cool games. And I think that's a real benefit of having something like that casting project that's helping people not just in the UK but all over the place.
Yeah,
because miscasts from the other side of the world, and he's getting stuff done through that as well. So,
who is our third option?
So, our third is Clearco Miniatures.
These are all very, very indie, I should say. Every single one of these is incredibly indie.
Well, they came out of Indie of the Week, so
which is, I mean, it's what God intended.
That is what this is about. It's about supporting the folk that are innovating at the small end of the scale. So,
and I mean, and Clearco is very much that. So much so, he sculpts. But then he can only get the stuff cast when he goes back home. So sort of like every 6 months. So he doesn't have a web store. He just kind of runs things off his blog. And when we discovered him, we were going through very much a Wild West phase. And there were quite a lot of fantastic Native Americans. I was just blown away by the standard of his sculpts. So much so that I, after doing the ND, I contacted him and went, yeah, I want these. And he went, yeah, I won't be back until June, July, whatever it was. And then I got an email like 4 months later going, I'm back. Do you want stuff? And I went, yes. I want one of everything. Thank you very much. Just empty my bank balance somewhat. These are actually new ones that I'm now going to have to order whenever he's back in and casting again. But those figures are absolutely superb, and for such a, I mean, indie, very much a one-man operation. His sculpting is absolutely superb, but also the diversity in the figures. So it's hard to get Native Americans for the likes of Legends of the Old West, that sort of thing.
Dead Man's Hand,
whatever you happen to be looking for. And when you do, the majority of the time, you will find that they are Plains Indians. They are generic. These cross the line into specific historicals. So you'll be able to look up and go, well, I want to have Crow or Sioux or Cheyenne, whatever it is, and they are all distinct. He also has a generic sort of Plains Indian type, which you can use to fill out if you're putting mobs of things together. But I absolutely adore his sculpting, and some of the sort of the leaders, medicine men or chiefs, are absolutely to die for with just the amount of detail. And it's literally what I've been looking for. I'm not going to say for my whole life, but certainly since I picked up Legends of the Old West, which would have been 20 plus years ago.
Wow.
I've been looking for a set of American Indians, and I've never found a company that does what I wanted.
Does them as well as this.
And this, I was so happy to find. And weirdly, when we were getting together to decide who was going to be Indie of the Year, and Ben suggested Clearco, I went, oh yeah, I've got all those models. Because they arrived while I was busy, and I put all those models away in a box, and I'll look at them when I'm not as busy, and I completely forgot. So I shall have to dig those out in the not too distant future. But those are our nominations for Indie of the Year.
First, congratulations to all of them, and congratulations to all of our Indies of the Week throughout the entire year. It is a real highlight for us to do Indie of the Week, and it's keep it up, keep up the innovation, keep up the just doing stuff differently.
Surprise us. I like to be surprised, and I never know what's going to surprise me next. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a surprise. Right. Our runner-up then for Indie of the Year. I hate you making me do this, Ben. It is Ramshackle Games for their community casting project.
Congratulations.
So much to love about tiny resin toe biters.
Exactly. And long may it continue. So,
But our winner, and there can only be one for the year, is going to Tabletop Skirmish Games for their fantastic rule sets.
Yes.
And insane productivity.
Oh, ridiculous productivity.
Yeah.
So yes.
I'm very eager to dive into that fantasy game. It looks really cool.
Yeah. It is on my list of things to buy in the not too distant future. Fantastic set of rules and a terrific indie as well. Tabletop Skirmish Games.
Congratulations to all of you, but especially to Tabletop Skirmish Games. It looks spectacular what you're doing.
We have one final award for this year. So next up, and finally, what blew our minds this year, Ben?
For the OnTableTop Choice Award for 2024, we've gone for something that I think in some ways surprised a lot of people as well. And this was the one and only Armored Clash by the folks at Warcradle Studios. Now, from my personal viewpoint, I've always been a little put off by this scale of games, just like 10 mil stuff, because it always feels like it's just a little bit extra complicated, a little bit finicky, a little bit weird, and there's always something that kind of niggles me about the games. But when I looked at what Warcradle were doing and James Hewitt and the rest of the team were doing when it came to Armored Clash, and then eventually what we brought to the screen when we did all the videos for it for the Armored Clash week and all that kind of thing, is a game that really seemed to distill down what makes those kind of games epic, but in a very approachable fashion. And I think it's one of the things that has drawn a lot of people into Armored Clash, because there's quite a few folk out there in the community and beyond that as well who I've seen going, never really considered 10 mil. This is a really nice kind of antidote to that. It's really given us the kind of vibe that we're looking for. Warcradle looked at what had happened previously with the likes of, Legions Imperialis, and you've got things like Drop Zone and stuff like that. And then Warcradle have gone, and the design team, by extension, have gone, what do people really like from those games that we can really turn up to 11 with Armored Clash and make that work? And I think throughout the entire of the core mechanics of the game, you get that across. I mean, I really like the nature of how vehicles and troops and characters and everything all interact differently depending on what they're fighting. There always seems to be this sense that everything's slightly more maneuverable on the tabletop as well. It doesn't feel like just big lines crashing against each other. There's actually a little element of kind of, that sort of sci-fi skirmishy thing that you tend to get with, other games of 28 mil, but sort of boiled down into a 10 mil format at the same time. I also really think that from a design point of view, the Dystopian Age is one that has a very clear and defined aesthetic to it. And every faction has a similarly a very defined feel to it as well. And you always run the danger, I think, with small scale games of just everything feeling like it looks the same but painted in a different color.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that turn people off from the likes of Legions Imperialis and stuff like that. Whereas every single faction that we've looked at from Warcradle for Armored Clash feels distinctly different. The Crown feels miles away in terms of look and feel from the Empire. The same goes for the Union, and we've seen previews for the Imperium and the Covenant and all that kind of thing. And all of those ranges all still feel, again, distinctly different from each other. A really interesting painting project in its own right. And it's also the case that Warcradle have definitely got their eye on this not just being a flash in the pan thing. There's a roadmap of stuff coming out throughout the course of the rest of 2025, where they're going to bulk out all of those different factions. They're going to give us campaign rules for bringing together both Dystopian Wars and Armored Clash, flyers, and all those other things as well. And it clearly feels like they've taken the pulse of the 10 mil wargaming community and gone, this is a pretty cool idea. Let's really make this work. And I think that's an impressive feat in its own right. So
I'm a massive fan, but before that, I want to address the elephant in the room here.
Oh yeah.
Some will wonder. They'll think, "Oh, hang on a second, you're all owned by the same parent company. How convenient is that you picked a game that is connected via the parent company?" This is a difficult one. Because what do you do as industry watchers? Do you turn around and you say, well, look, it's just not going, we just can't pick it, which is it's a disservice to it because it's so good.
Well, they've done a great job on it, and you can't ignore that.
And on top of that, I'm just a huge fan of James Hewitt's design approach. I'm a massive fan of it.
When boyfriend.
when he took over Armored Clash, I thought to myself, "Oh right, this is going to be interesting." Yeah. And I see it interesting from the long-term path because remember, James only had 6 months with it. Just imagine what's going to happen now over the next 6 months, the next 18 months, the next number of years.
There's a lot to be said beyond the actual rules as well. Because we've been talking about this solely from a rules point of view, but they did obviously produce a range of both terrain and the miniatures to go with, and then keeping it relatively, keep it simple, stupid. You've got your 2 sprues of infantry and 2 sprues of armored, and then they just extrapolate out from there and keeping the design philosophy to go, well, whatever's on the sprue is a complete unit. If you want 2 units, buy 2 boxes or 2 sprues or whatever it happens to be. So you have that, you can escalate very simply and you're never having to worry about the list building. Oh, I want to have this at this size, therefore I need to buy 3 boxes, but I'm going to end up with 2 models left over type of, thing that you'll get from other types of games. A unit is a unit, and it's either, small, medium or large. And that is 1 box, 2 box, 3 box.
Yeah.
Wash.
Yeah.
That in itself takes a lot of the pain out of getting started in the game. And then the miniatures themselves are by and large one piece for your infantry.
Lovely plastics and resins.
Yeah, hard plastic across the board. And then, like you were saying about terrain, that modular Armored Clash, the modular dystopian age buildings.
Yeah. I'm a fan of small skirmish or of small scale games because of the huge, epic cinematic feel of it. The fact that combined arms makes so much more sense whenever you scale everything down. Your terrain options just go bananas. This game, to me, is the one that will potentially have the biggest impact on that dystopian age thing that those guys have been working on. But and I have my own opinions on these things. I find Dystopian Wars quite a high barrier of entry to Dystopian Wars. It's a complicated game. This, however, has equal amount of depth, but it is so elegant in how you approach this game. It really is very well written.
The fact it's not just dystopian wars on land.
Yes.
It's not just because it would have been very easy just to go, we have a mechanic. We know we're going to have massive land ships. Why not just do a land-based version, but going, no, change the scale, change list building, change what defines a unit and how they come together. The orders of battle are all very, not just
the
distinctive.
entire design team, I think they set themselves the task of when they looked at it, they said, look, forget what's gone before, okay? What serves this game the best? We're creating a game, we're creating a range. What serves it, rather than just what do we know? And I think at some point, the core team decided to bring in fresh blood with the likes of James and the Needy Cat crew with Sophie and whatnot, specifically because I think they hit that point where they said, that's what serves this game.
Yeah,
we need some fresh blood in here, to take this in a new direction, and that's what they did. And for me, it paid off because I look at that game and I haven't touched my Imperialist stuff. So and I've been repurposing my Imperialist buildings for this. Armored Clash is a worthy winner for this, just for the impact that it can potentially have on this scale of gaming again. So
if you want to go big, go small.
Yeah,
very true.
It's a takeaway from 2024. Right, that wraps us up for our awards for this year. I imagine people will be commenting massively below about how wrong we were about all of them.
Yeah.
Feel free to pop those in.
We love hearing what you have to say.
Yes. Won't take any of it on board, but we love hearing it.
Yeah. And obviously, of course, runners-up and winners will all get themselves a wonderful plaque.
Yes.
To put in their toilet in the office or on their desk, whichever they see fit to do. And
we've had some winners over the past couple of years who've gone, this is amazing. It's the first time we've won.
Yeah.
And going, how is this the first time you've been recognized in the industry? It's it's always nice to get out there and offer up plaudits to people.
Share the love.
Yes.
So a massive thank you to all of the companies in our industry. You're doing a fantastic job. We love the innovation. We love where you're going. Keep it up. And also a massive thank you to the wider community and the OnTableTop community for bringing stuff to our attention. For commenting week in, week out, and steering some of our viewpoints. And they influence us as much as we might influence them. So it's an absolute pleasure to bring the annual awards for the industry because it's a recap, it's an exploration. Some might even say it's an exclamation point for the year.
On that note, have a great 2025.
Yeah,
we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.